Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, brothers and sisters, and welcome to the fourth episode of the Convo podcast. Inshallah, this episode is on the topic of special needs children, which of course is a topic which needs no introduction. It's a very, very important topic. At the heart of this topic are the children themselves, and of course any relationships like parents, siblings, and any other stakeholders like teachers, healthcare professionals, specialists. It's a topic that has a very wide-ranging scope in terms of a target audience. We hope, inshallah, that this podcast will be of benefit to us, that we can learn from it. And we do have a very interesting discussion in store. So inshallah, what we're going to do is we're going to take a very quick break for our introduction, and we'll return to introduce our guest speakers for tonight. So off to our introduction.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back. Okay, so we'll get straight into it, inshallah. We've got two very special, notable guests with us today. We've got ourselves Sister Sanoba Rizvi, who is a psychologist, and we've also got Sister Amira Kirsten, who is an experienced educator. And both of our guests today, alhamdulillah, have quite significant experience, both professionally and personally, in the issue of special needs. So first of all, Jazakallah khair, thank you both very much for being on. We really appreciate you making the time for this discussion.
Okay, so inshallah we've got we've got quite a few issues we want to look at in this episode. Like we said in the introduction, it's a very important topic that is of interest to very many people. So, you know, special needs is a topic which often is thrust upon people in the most unexpected of ways. And, you know, it's this archetypical sort of framework where sometimes parents, without any specific notice, have to then quickly grapple with the issue, learn about it, research it, and try and cope with the issue itself, if it's personal to them. If not, we have, of course, advocates for the issue. We have researchers in the issue. We have specialists. We have healthcare professionals. And as we mentioned, it's a topic that has very wide-ranging scope and wide-ranging interest.
Indeed, yeah.
We want to look specifically at the Muslim community. Yes, we want to look at the topic generally, in a personal capacity, and I think as Hamza mentioned, you have some very interesting experiences we'd very much like to hear from and to learn about, but also society, the Muslim community, parents, children, how the various people in this issue are affected. So inshallah, we'll get started. Can we perhaps ask firstly of our guests, and maybe I'll start with yourself, Sister Sanoba. Can you maybe perhaps start by telling us your understanding of just generally of special needs as a term? What is that term a reference to?
Well, assalamu alaikum. With special needs, it says like, as we say, special needs or additional needs. Of course, we are referring to people or particularly children who have some more needs, or how we call it, differently abled, or people of all, like when we're trying to be exclusive, we say people of all abilities. But I would say that they're differently abled. So their systems are wired differently, and they have different needs compared to the mainstream children.
Okay. And Sister Amira, did you want to add something to that?
I guess from an educational perspective, if we're talking about children with special needs, then we're talking about the adjustments and resources that we need to be using to modify things in the classroom to enable them to access education as equally as any other child would be able to. So yeah, just different adjustments and resources that they would need to access.
Yeah, I just have a quick question, just coming off of that. Because there's a lot of sort of different terms that are used and mentioned. And I have a couple of things or quick questions that I wanted to ask regarding that. So how important, Sister Sanoba, you mentioned that it's sort of different abilities and special needs and so forth. So how important is it that we identify it as different abilities, not sort of disabilities? Or how important is that we don't see it as a lack, but rather a difference? Is there something in that we need to understand?
No, I think that would be the crux of inclusion, that if you think that they're differently wired and differently able, that would actually increase the acceptance, and that would increase, like the sister said, the adjustment to that we have different kids in our home and we treat them differently because they have different personalities. So just rooting from that, it's just that if we say the person has lack of something, that would kind of just gain sympathies and not an adjustment, like you said, sister. So I think it's very important, and it makes a huge difference of how you look at them.
We wanted to also just start by asking you guys a little bit about your personal experience. What inspired you? I mean, you're guests on this show, and you were suggested by people within our circles as, okay, yes, get this sister on and get this sister on. They'll be very good for the show because they've got, such and such experience and so forth. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about, so our audience can get to know you a little bit better? What inspired you to learn, to propagate, to advocate, to be active in this field? Sister Amira.
Okay, so I guess as you mentioned when you opened up, very interestingly, my eldest son, who was my firstborn, I gave birth to him, and within the first 3 years realized very, very quickly that there was something not quite right, because his language wasn't developing as it should developmentally. So I was faced with a situation, being a young mother and having my first child, had diagnosed at the age of 3 with a hearing impairment. Now, it was quite a shock for a number of reasons. We had no one in our whole family that we knew that had a disability, let alone a hearing impairment of any sort. And I guess also, just for the simple fact that, all of a sudden I was faced with the reality of raising this child that I faced all sorts of stigmas about. For the first few years, I felt the need to cover his hair so that you couldn't see the hearing aids.
Wow.
I had family members who unintentionally would make remarks to me. He was very challenging with his behavior, and I struggled a lot with that. And then the lack of support from not only just within my family, but within the Muslim community. We ended up as a family reaching out to an organization known as the Catholic Center for Hearing Impaired Children. And subhanAllah, they ended up becoming like family to us, ironically. And it was during these years that, I'd finished studying. I had started realizing through meeting more and more Muslims through non-Muslim organizations that there actually was a whole big, world out there of children and families, Muslim, that actually didn't have any support at all, had no networks of support. And unfortunately, or fortunately, look, we're living in Australia and we're very, very fortunate to have the Western services that are out there. But that, we couldn't reach out to brothers or sisters in Islam that could give us not only the educational knowledge that we needed, but the spiritual and moral and emotional support. I think that as a family, as a mum really craved for. And so I guess this then, through my journey of education, led me to fall into various roles. as in teaching, through working as an itinerant support teacher for hearing impaired children, to working in both mainstream and special educational settings. And, you know, it's always been a kind of I think I spoke to Brother Hamza about this, a passion of mine to want to get involved. And there's been certain times where I've tried to make some road works within the Muslim community, but have never felt that it's led anywhere, unfortunately. So for me tonight, this is a wonderful opportunity to, if anything, just share my experience, but then, you know, also hopefully spark a conversation around what support can be provided moving forward.
No, absolutely, and the feeling's mutual there. It is an absolute honour to have with someone with as rich an experience as yourself, and of course the passion to join us on this platform, and hopefully, like you said, we can start a conversation and keep it going. You mentioned that you struggled within the Muslim community, and you know, in some ways, whether it's fortunate or unfortunate, you had to sort of look elsewhere. That is one of the themes that you know, connects a lot of our issues, and we're going to explore that a little bit more about, you know, this sort of dark, you know, underbelly within the community of issues that just so important, but they're not given their due
under the carpet, unfortunately.
And it's something that, of course, like, you know, in our previous episodes, we looked at issues like, you know, we looked at political issues, we looked at Hajj and Eid, and we looked at the issue of the Lebanese crisis and stuff, but this issue is so close to home for so many people. I think there were many in the audience that appreciated that we're discussing an issue that is so close to home. Sister, if I can get Sister Sanoba, if you can maybe share something similar as well, where you're coming from, like why is this issue so close to your heart?
I have an interesting story that my path of education was already defined, and I was already a psychologist when I had my firstborn. And he had different behaviors, and I, being a psychologist, was not aware of them. And because, you know, when you're studying, you never think that you'll have a child who would have the similar behaviors. And as parents, we're all in denial, no matter how educated you are. So there's a lack of acceptance. So that we went through that lack of acceptance as well. But finally, when we saw that he's lagging in his speech and in his other milestones and his behaviors are different, so we started with a delayed speech diagnosis, but ultimately it turned out to be autism spectrum disorder. So he is my firstborn as well, and I was already studied, but for some time, I was already educated and completed my study, but for some reason I could not bring myself to work for these children because I thought I would have personal biases in that. But at some point in his parenting, I realized that if I already have the qualification in this area, why not I start working in this as well? And my personal example was, of course, very helpful for me to help other families, other parents. And I would agree to Sister Mira that unfortunately, there's no support available at an organizational level. At the personal level, it's absolutely different thing. At one hand, we do not understand, we do not support each other because of our lack of awareness, because of our lack of knowledge in the area. Maybe if I have a child, a special needs child in my family, I would know more than you, but if you do not have it, you might not. So it's just works like that. I would see people at different people's places and they would say, oh, okay, so you have such a child, so how did you go? Can you help this other sister that I know? Yeah. And this is the way I found support, and this is the way I supported people. I also went to some organizations for how to access school, how to access a support class, how to access NDIS, and in all that I found no Muslim organization, unfortunately.
So I just on that note, so it's I think there's a general perception that unfortunately the Muslim community is a little behind the eight ball on this issue. But from what it seems both of you guys are suggesting, it's that it's possibly even a little more severe than that. Like, it's not just that we're a little behind, but that some things are almost like non-existent. That's really troubling to hear. Like, we should, as a Muslim community, we should have arguably a greater degree of compassion and concern for these very, very serious issues that certainly exist within our community, but as Brother Sufyan mentioned, they are often just sort of swept under the carpet. I guess my question would be, how much would it have meant to you guys if there was like a Muslim organization centered, specialized on the issue of special needs, and that you could access and go to? Like Sister Amira mentioned, she had to go to a Christian organization. Sister Sanoba, you had to go to others as well. How much would it have meant to you to have something internally from the Muslim community?
I can say from my perspective, it certainly would have been a huge relief in all facets, from, just relieving pressure from myself, between myself and my husband at the time, my children who were undergoing a lot of stress because of, appointments that we had to attend, behavior that was not managed very well. Look, a great deal. It would really have meant a huge deal, even spiritually. I think for any Muslim, when you're faced with a test, and this is how we have to view this, subhanallah, we're all faced with different tests in our life, and these tests come easier when you're supported by a community. So I think that definitely for going forward in Australia, I think as Muslims we're doing a lot of positive things, and we're doing a lot of things right. We're getting education on the right track. We're looking after many facets of the community needs, but one of those areas, unfortunately, whether it's due to cultural misperceptions or perceptions of shame, lack of an awareness, as Sister Sanoba mentioned, we need to overcome some of these barriers as a community and face the reality of what is happening out there, so that we can properly resource and support our Muslim brothers and sisters, inshallah.
No, of course, and of course we all pray for sort of progress in that area. You mentioned that in your own experience, you found yourself just going from appointment to appointment, and that often is the experience of parents in this field. Finding themselves moving from appointment to appointment, sitting through therapies, learning, on their own, just doing their research, what their children's needs are. And there's a lot of room for something at the organizational level or the developmental level. I wanted to look at the issue from a historical point of view. And there's no hard and fast, like we're not coming from a specific research point of view, but just like in preparation for this podcast and the research that it required, until about 10 years ago, the issue of special needs it seemed as if it wasn't very prevalent. Maybe in the community, maybe in literature. It seems like it's gaining a certain level of prominence now compared to about 10, 15 years ago. My question is, in your opinion, from what you've read and understood of the issue, is special needs, is there a growing prevalence in children of special needs who have special needs? Or is it just that the awareness is growing? There's more social media, or is it actually a case of growing prevalence of children with special needs? Sister Sanoba, if you can maybe address that.
Yeah, I think both have increased, because it's quite debatable. Like with a physical disability, of course, there are a lot of connections that you can make to maybe genetics or something that happened during birth or something like that. But with psychological disorders or developmental delays like autism or ADHD, it's quite debatable. A lot of people make a connection to the vaccinations. In our case, we vaccinated our son, and he turned out to be autistic. So a parent like me would say, yes, that's true. But then I got the same vaccination to my second born, and she's fine. So the researchers are basically in both directions, and there's no 100% valid research that can establish that connection. Then a lot of researchers also point towards the processed foods and the kind of the pesticides that you use during while we grow our crops and everything like that. But in terms of genetics, I'm the one who is really interested in finding out why, and we got all the genetic kind of testing done for him. But like our neurologist said, that there are like 20,000 genes in our human body, and we can only test a few of them. So, it's very hard to even find out, even if it was genetic. But I think the numbers have definitely increased, and so is the awareness.
Sister Amira, on that point, like environmental factors, biological factors, genetic factors, even some research points to things like stress, like increased level of stress in mothers who then give birth to children who end up having special needs requirements and so forth. What's your reading on the issue, or what's your take been on the issue? What have you read that you might want to share with us on that?
Look, I think I agree with Sister Sanoba. It's kind of a half thing. I think there's always been a case for special needs out there. It's just that a lot of children in the past or historically have gone undiagnosed. So where a child typically in the past, we might have put down their inappropriate behaviour due to just being a naughty child or a difficult child, we've now, through increased research and, genetic testing, come to become aware of more additional needs that are out there. With my son, he also had a case of genetic deafness, which we then started investigating in the family. So in some cases, what I found out with hearing impairment is that sometimes 1 in 13 people carry a specific recessive gene for deafness, but they actually don't even know it. So, there's always been a case for special needs being prevalent in our society. And I think in Australia, in a lot of Western countries, we're just very fortunate to have had access to growing bodies of research and genetic testing. The case for autism, now this has been quite a debatable one that I've read quite a lot about, and through some of the work I've done in adult education, where I worked with, a lot of teachers that go out to work in special schools as teachers' aides, what we found was that there's a kind of a data in Australia that we can't really be certain about, and a lot of it's tied to government funding. So in Australia, autism attracts a bucket of financial funding than many of the other types of additional needs. And in some cases where a child may have ADHD or another type of additional need, some parents are kind of, what we've found, pushing doctors to put their child into the autism bracket to be able to access the funding. So from what I understand, though there seems to be a growing number of children with autism, the data may be unreliable.
Okay. Just on that note, so we've mentioned autism a couple of times now, and that's one particular area of special needs. But as we know, there's many different types of special needs as well. We've got, the autisms that have the sort of intellectual and developmental impairments, and there's other special needs cases within that category. But then there's sort of a vast range of other sort of sensory, you could say, perhaps, special needs as well. So we've got, as Sister Amira's pointed out, you've got hearing impairments. There's also visual impairments. There's mobility impairments. There's all these various kinds of impairments. Sister Sanoba, I wanted to ask, what's your experience with different types of special needs, and the way that they all have to be looked at individually? Because it perhaps would be a disservice to just put all of those with quote-unquote special needs into that one basket and not look at them in particular ways.
Yeah, I'll just go back to the previous question when we were discussing that in the last 10 years, or in the last 10 years, we have become more aware. But I would say that before 1 or 2 decades, we used to look at disabilities as being physical only. When you talk about a disabled person, you would think of somebody in a wheelchair or with crutches or with, something physical that's more visual. And having a psychological disability is even harder in a way that, people would look at you and would expect mainstream behaviors. Yeah. And, people would look at your child and would say, oh, he looks okay. Why is he behaving like that? Or because he has some needs that you cannot see. And so in terms of disabilities, we all are very much aware about the physical one. So the psychological ones can be severe mental health illness, or a child who was born as a very neurotypical child can go through a trauma and lose his mom, or, was in the war, and as a result can develop a severe attachment disorder. This can be psychological or mental health related, or it can be a developmental delay, that a child was born with a delay, or it could be an intellectual disability, that a child is perfectly fine physically, psychologically, but he has a learning disability or a cognitive impairment. So there's no basket, or there's no collective kind of term, but we collectively call them children with special needs or different abilities. And yes, we really need to identify all these abilities in their own perspectives and work accordingly to help them.
Jazakallah khair. And I just had a quick sort of question off the top of my head that was coming to mind in preparation for some of this, which is that I was looking at some statistics and so forth with regards to disability generally, and noting that I think it was 1 in 5 Australians are classified as having a disability. A quick question, Sister Amira here. Is disability synonymous with special needs, or are they separate categories, or is there a particular line that can be drawn? Because I was just looking into that. I wasn't particularly sure myself, so I thought I'd ask.
Look, from an educational perspective, so we try to avoid, the term disability. So you'd find that people tend to use the word additional needs, special needs. The language is really important. Sister Sanova mentioned this before. If we're going to move forward, positively, then we need to focus on what they are doing, or the person first and the additional needs secondly. So disability, I guess, is the term that was typically used in the past, but these days, in order to be more inclusive, we're now using the term additional needs or special needs, and they can be really wide-ranging. I need to echo some of those sentiments that Sister Sanova mentioned about the types of additional needs now, because our kind of scope for additional needs has become so wide now, and those ones that don't or can't physically be seen are truly harder to understand. And when she mentioned earlier about we kind of assume typical behaviours from a child that may have an additional need, but we can't see that. It really sparked something for me that happened with my eldest son as he went into high school, because he was mainstreamed. He was in public education to start with, and he had an itinerant support teacher that used to withdraw him for support. But later on, as he went into high school, became a lot more confident, and I eventually put him into an Islamic school. But again, just to show the differences in attitudes and acceptance towards additional needs in the public education forum versus Islamic school education forum, I remember going to a parent-teacher interview with one of his high school teachers, and the first thing she said to me was, "Miss Kirsten, I think your son has selective hearing." And I said to her, I beg to differ, he has a medical diagnosis of a severe to profound hearing loss. And she said, well, it seems to me that he can hear some things and not others. And, it broke my heart at the time, but I was on this mission to prove her wrong. So I ended up making another appointment with her, and I actually brought in an old pair of his hearing aids with a stethoscope, where you can attach the stethoscope to his aid, and she could put it in her ears to hear the type of sound that he was hearing. And subhanAllah, her eyes when she heard that sound for the first time was something I can't forget, because she really did not realize what he was going through, because again, it wasn't something, it was his hair would often cover the aids. He seemed regular in every other way, and she had no idea what he was battling in a classroom with echoing noise and a lot of voices that are going around him. So we do really have, I think, a big stride and stretch to go in Islamic schools and in our Muslim communities, with just, being a little bit more inclusive, tolerant, accepting, and empathetic to what people with additional needs experience.
It is. It is. Jazakallah khair for sharing that experience. It's eye-opening. It's mind-boggling because you think, in the area of teaching, or not just teaching, but like legislation, in various industries, you are bombarded almost with, adjustments. Like the notion of things need to be adjusted to cater for people with different needs, right? And so obviously there's some people that fall through the cracks, and it just doesn't maybe cross their minds, and it becomes an issue, as you said, of raising awareness.
Maybe even on that, perhaps it's the fact that it's so bombarded. Sometimes what you actually need is experience. You need to actually talk to someone with it or encounter it and actually get a hands-on realization of the extent of the issue. Like perhaps that teacher that you were talking about, Miss Kirsten, was someone who hadn't had the experience before and was unaware. And as you mentioned, like the eyes opening wide really demonstrated that, it actually hit her then. And Jazakallah khair, there was a really powerful and profound experience. So thank you very much for sharing that. Really, really appreciate it.
I wanted to ask, I watched a show, again, in the lead up to this. It was a show on ABC with Lee Sales, if you know the reporter. She was doing a show on special needs, and she had some specialists as guests who'd come on. And at one part of the report, it was talking about autistic children and the fact that they don't get the kind of support that they need in a classroom setting. And they said that, of course, like, I remember it just struck me because it was talking about, and we know from a teaching experience that classrooms can be very, very complex social environments. Like you've got the issue of working in groups, building, sustaining, maintaining friendships, being taunted, bullied, right, teased, and all that stuff. It's a complex social environment. And she gave the example of a mother with an autistic child who, not because of like some extensive research that she did, but just because of sheer desperation. And I just want to quote her. She said, "If you had seen the fear and absolute anxiety in my child, the actual terror of sending him to school." She was just talking about her experience, where she had put her child in for 2 months, and then had to pull her kid out. Again, not because of research that she had done, but it just dawned on her that no, there's no level of support here for this kid whatsoever. And of course, it's very different to a philosophical sort of argument where parents, say, I choose to homeschool my child. This mother was forced, and the child was seriously suffering, and so many parents are really just desperate and confused about what to do. So maybe again, from an educator's perspective, can you maybe just shed light on what your experience has been with various parents who've had to grapple with that from your experience?
Is that with me or
yeah, just with yourself from an educator's perspective? Yeah.
Okay, so look, I think from my experience in working with children with autism, I have to say, in the public arena, the public school system is really well equipped and set up for this type of for these types of children, and in small group type situations, classrooms. In mainstream classrooms where you have children with a moderate to milder type of autism functioning, you may find that they've got teachers' aides who come in and support the child in that mainstream classroom. So I have to say I've had nothing but very positive experiences of these children being supported in public education. The problem I've faced is when I'm working in Islamic schools and we have children who may be undiagnosed on the spectrum, and through various decisions that parents make, they choose to put their children into these schools, knowing that the school is not equipped with those types of support systems, which is unfortunate. The other thing too, I do believe, is that a lot of our Islamic schools are set up and geared towards the academically driven student. And there's very little consideration even at all given for the diversity of children that Allah has created. And it would be good to see in the future that an Islamic school, like the Catholic education system, can cater for both types of children. That you've got, a system that can cater for mainstream children, the gifted and talented children, but similarly for children with additional needs, and whether they have that level of support in a mainstream classroom or in a special education unit. But we certainly have the capacity and expertise to do it. We just haven't had the financial investment, because again, from an Islamic perspective, when we see financial investment, we tend to think of academic gain, and how is that going to be a benefit to a community?
I think on the topic of sort of schooling and so forth, it's firstly it's not ideal at all that we as Muslims unfortunately are sort of not at the forefront of this. It's really saddening as well, but also I think perhaps one way that we could possibly explain this, or two ways rather, would be that one, there's a stigma attached to the issue amongst the Muslim community of special needs, of mental health, of these kinds of issues. There's just sort of this unapproachable air to it, like just it's taboo, don't go there, don't talk about it, don't discuss it. And if there is a family with a special needs child, then it's kind of looked at a little weird and a little strangely, like, oh, maybe it's something that they've done wrong or it's the fault of them. And it's unfortunate, it's really saddening, but it is kind of an undertone that we can sometimes feel. That's perhaps one reason why Muslim schools aren't as accommodating. But on the other hand as well, there's sort of, as Sister Amira mentioned, there's this viewpoint of success, which is just that academic success. And, a lot of the Muslim schools have parents from migrant backgrounds who migrated for economic reasons, and they just want their kids to get good marks, get a good job, be financially stable, go into the workforce and do things that way. And that's that measure of success. And if you've got a child who perhaps is not going down that particular road, then it can be seen as being, outside of the mold and not necessarily something that wants to be looked at. But perhaps we can ask Sister Sanoba, just on that taboo kind of nature of special needs in the Muslim community. Have you had any particular experiences with that? Has the Muslim community opened up a little? Is it still fairly insular? What would you say about that issue?
I would agree to a few things that you said, that we would either not talk about it, or we would just have feelings of guilt or shame, as if this is something that we have done. But fortunately, I always had people in my family who would always say, like Sister Mia said, that it's a test, because for us, life is a test. Everything that happens for a reason from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And, we cannot kind of complain about that. So if your family is mirroring, and if your family is reassuring you of these things, I think that is a big support. And if you hang out with people who also say similar things, oh, you're getting lots of rewards for that, or you're working hard on your child, and Allah is, parenting is already hard, so Allah Ta'ala is even doubling your rewards and things like that. I think that makes a huge difference. And not to deny that I have had interactions with people who were totally on the other side, that, giving you those looks or bullying your child or not understanding. But I think for us, Muslim society being a collective society is still a blessing, because we do have supports. Like, I have found people who would not have anyone to hang out with. Nobody is available where they understand their child, they welcome their child, the special needs child, in their play behavior. They're happy to adjust their small little games as per that child's needs. But I am quite fortunate that I had some families who in my immediate and in my friends circle, where they understood my child and they helped him grow, and they helped him learn the skills where he had to be given special attention for. But in terms of, I would just like to add that in terms of schooling, I moved interstate because of Islamic schools. And okay. I found out that my son cannot go to the Islamic school where my girls are admitted to. So, that was a big shock. And that was like, when you entered Islamic school, you have a different feeling, or you see people like you, very relatable, Assalamu alaikum, how are you, sister, and things like that. And finally you tell that, oh, my child has a special need. And they're like, oh, no, we're not the expert people. So that gives you a shock. You're like, oh, where do I go then? And
I think for you, sorry to cut you, for you specifically, it must have been, particularly hard. I know my own sister had to sort of make a choice to not put my niece in an Islamic school because it just didn't have the required support available. Yeah. But then for you, you came from Pakistan, you had to settle in Australia, and then again move interstate. So that's like
double whammy.
Yeah. It's been a very difficult process.
Yeah, and Sister Mia is right that public system has very, very supportive and the kind of infrastructure that is required for special needs kids. But I would also like to share an experience that since the last few years, we have actually changed. Like, we have seen 4 or 5 schools for my child, and they all had different setups. Like, for 1 year, the teacher could not, in a public school, he has always gone to a public school. So in a public school, they could not recognize what his learning level is, what his needs are, how much language does he have. And, the whole shift of language change and everything was also there. So I thought that 1 or 1.5 year was totally wasting identifying, because I think the teacher matters a lot. And the next 2 years were like awesome because the teacher was great. In the same public school, same class, everything was same. But the teacher made the whole difference. And I have seen that public schools have the right systems, the right procedures, and the right supports, I would say, to help these children.
I guess there's a lot that we can learn, perhaps as a community, from the public school side of things. Hopefully we can, gather some of that experience in some kind of way and ship that off towards Muslim schools as well.
And we're not much of a family at the Convo. It's just the 2 of us and our tech guys. But, we are a family that's open to, inshallah, anyone who is going through those issues. We are willing to listen, have a conversation on the topic. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept. Look, Sister Amira, I wanted to ask, you mentioned, and as did yourself, Sister Sanoba, that you both have some experience as parents of children with special needs. In my experience in my immediate and then extended family as well, yes, this issue is about the children and they are at the center of the attention. Again, without taking any of that attention off of them, parents are sort of these unsung heroes, who, as we mentioned at the start, running around from doctor appointment to appointment, therapy sessions, researching, trying to grapple with the issue and understand, often, ill-equipped, almost always unrecognized. What would your message be as parents in your position to other parents? And I know for a fact that there are parents of special needs children listening to this episode. What would your message be to them, if both of you can, maybe starting with yourself, Sister Amira?
I think that to basically understand that the support is out there and available, and whether you have to access it from a non-Muslim organization or a Muslim organization, if you can find that, that you should do that. And that, needing support is not a sign of weakness or, it's not something to be ashamed of. Having a child with an additional need is not anything to be ashamed of. It's one of Allah's creation, and we have to be grateful for every aspect of Allah's creation and focus on the reward of that, as Sister Sanoba mentioned. I think that we make dua for every family that is out there that's going through this within their family. And, I would encourage you to seek the assistance and the support that you do need. Ask the questions. And know that you're not alone. And if you do need to reach out to anyone, even if I could say to both of the brothers that are hosting this podcast, may Allah reward you, that I would be willing to be a support for any other family that is out there. So it's a great cause, inshallah, that you both are an initiative doing tonight. Alhamdulillah.
Jazakallah khair. Sister Sanoba, did you want to add something to that? Maybe your message to parents?
Yeah, just stay strong. just be there for your child, because like Sister Mira said, that Allah has blessed you with this little human being, this vulnerable person, and you're the last hope they have. And a lot of people come to me and ask me that, how do you manage this, and how do you manage this stressful job? And I say that, look, I'm my son's last hope. Like, the second last would be his dad, because, we're the only ones, we're the parents. And if we give up, there's nobody out there for him. So, and just have hope, whether it's severe autism, whether it's a permanent physical disability, whatever it is, just keep trying. Keep trying. And at times people come to me and very rudely ask. I remember I went to a school a few years ago, and I said that, I want this for my child, and I want this for my child. So I was all charged up like any mom. And somebody very rudely said that, for how long do you think your child will be at school?
Oh,
and I said, I have no idea. But I will not give up. I would actually try to see if he was born with 70% potential, I would not settle in for 69. So, I have to go on, and I am never going to give up. So all the parents who are listening, I would say that, keep trying, and definitely, inshallah, keep praying, make dua, and you will see the rewards. It takes time, but you will definitely see positive behaviors.
Of course, at the end of the day, it's all about the rewards. It's all about pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But also these kids will turn around one day, after looking back at all the support and all the sacrifices that their parents, parents who don't have children with special needs make a lot of sacrifices, but then this is sacrifice on another level. It's incomprehensible.
Yeah, it's honestly incomparable.
Of sacrifice that, and then children will appreciate that. They'll turn around and look at, and that love is just you can't express that in words.
As they say, not all heroes wear capes.
Thank you for that, Hamza.
But also, I found it really wonderfully encouraging, Sister Sonoba, where you mentioned a bit earlier on in our discussion that there are there's support amongst parents and Muslims who, when they see each other, they will sort of greet each other, support each other, assist each other. So I guess, if we haven't necessarily got the organizational structures and sort of procedures in place, which hopefully, inshallah, the Muslim community can mature into, then at the very least, we've got this kind of sense of community that's there for those parents of special needs children. I thought that was really wonderfully encouraging to hear.
Yeah. Is there something is there something specific you might point to for anyone that like you said, for our audience, if you want to send a question in later and we can redirect it to any of our guests at the moment, but is there anything specific you might be able to redirect any parents to, like a support group? It might even be a WhatsApp group. It might be something on the weekends, or if not, then okay, we can leave it and maybe get back to the issue. But if there is something, maybe let us know.
Well, anything and everything, I would say. Join Facebook pages, just search for special needs support groups, special needs gymnastics, Muslim community groups, mothers in my area, play groups, whatever you can. And the more people the more resources the more experiences the better it is for your child. And with the NDIS, with the support class, I think you need to follow up. You should not think that you have just filled a form and somebody will contact you. No, you need to follow up everything in this country. You call the well-being officer, you call the education directorate, or you call the NDIS office, and just keep reminding them.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, you really do need to be your child's advocate, and keep being that advocate for them. As Sister Sonoba said, they're vulnerable. They only have you, and if you can't be an advocate for them, then they're really at a loss, aren't they?
Yeah. I wanted to just ask. So we've spoken a bit about community and sort of, what we'd want to sort of have the community provide to parents and children who are involved with special needs. But I wanted to ask if you had a particular message that you could deliver, or particular way that you could adjust the community, or something you could address to those people in authority, like, say school principals, imams of masajid, community centers,
business owners, just anyone.
Yeah, whoever it might be, service providers, Muslims in health services. What would you say we could do as a community to further address this issue? Maybe we can start with you, Sister Amira.
I think I really believe that the mashayikh of our communities have a big role to play in educating our communities about acceptance, and to have a conversation about this issue of shame and, sweeping things under the carpet. We need to open up and remove these barriers so that people can feel a level of comfort and trust to reach out to people in the community, and to go about, living their life with their families and their children of difference in a way that's accepted. The other thing that I would like to say from an educational perspective is that for people, whether it be future business people that are going in to open up schools, or the people currently sitting on boards of schools, is that, please, we really do need to open up our sphere of what we're offering in terms of education. We can't just limit education to mainstream and gifted and talented children. We have to be able to, as Muslims, like it's actually, what we stand for, really, from the sunnah of the Prophet. Like we should be a people of all people. Yep. And, if we're not going to be able to take in these children, and we're going to leave them to the mercy of non-Muslims, then we're really not doing justice to our cause and being true to our deen. So I really feel that people in education need to put their money in all spheres, and special needs is one of them.
Sister Snaba, can you maybe, just on that point, Sister Amira mentioned insights from the Quran, maybe if you could mention something similar. Is there some verse of the Quran, is there some aspect of the life of the Prophet ﷺ that for you speaks specifically to this issue, or for you has been a source of strength, a source of inspiration, a source of motivation? Is there something like specifically that maybe you'd want to share with our audience tonight?
Of course, I'm not an expert on this, but as far as I know, our Prophet ﷺ has always been kind to blind people, disadvantaged people. And as far as I know, Quran does not exactly mention disability, but it does mention disadvantaged or weak-minded people. So when there's compulsion of something, it would always say that other than the ill or the weak-minded or the disadvantaged. So a lot of researchers consider disabled children or special needs children to come under the disadvantaged one. And it's just that overall, Islam is a religion of equity and equality. Yeah. So, and nobody is supposed to call anyone by offensive name or, bully them or ridicule at them generally. So if we keep that spirit, we should be a bit more inclusive in our approach. Yeah, and definitely. We can address these kids as well.
Okay. Jazakallah khair. We want to go to our callers and see if there's anyone that would like to ask any questions or comments. To those listening, we do have our number up on screen. If you see on the bottom right-hand corner, it's so small I can't actually see it from here myself.
Yep, I'm trying to read it myself, can't make it out.
If we can, is there a way to blow that number up by any chance, guys? Or I can't actually read the number out from here. Sorry, man.
It's on screen, so for those who are watching, please feel free to jump on the phone, give us a call, and extend this conversation, inshallah. But in the meanwhile, I thought I'd share a little something that I was looking into. With the whole COVID dramas, right? So there was that transition to online teaching and learning, and parents having to be much more involved in terms of the education of their children. I was listening to a report about how that had impacted the education of children with special needs, because obviously that's a very particular and specialized area of teaching. And so there were these parents who were being interviewed about how they were trying to deal with it, because obviously they could no longer send their children to those particular institutions, or the educators weren't able to attend to them. And I remember there was one particular mother who just broke down, and she said, look, I'm entirely reliant on these services, and I'm very involved, and I'm very sort of concerned about the education of my child, but I simply don't have the skill set. I don't have the skill set. And she said that in a month or two, I've had about 2 or 3 sessions where I've actually been able to engage my child and try and teach them something. And then she said, I chalked that down to a win, because there was nothing else that I could possibly do. And there was just a whole host of parents who were talking about how, this particular situation that we've got nowadays with COVID has really impacted the education of their children who might have special needs. So I found that particularly interesting. Perhaps if you guys have any particular experience in any of that as well, sort of some of the particular requirements that are needed for children with special needs in terms of their education, what can you possibly share with us? Perhaps Sister Amira, you've got some insights. I know you mentioned generally the adjustments and so forth, but maybe a little more detail.
Look, I know that the school that I currently work at, with one of the children in particular who is diagnosed with autism, one of the things that we found with him was that we needed to set up individual Google Classrooms for him for one-on-one sessions. But, it's kind of like a double-edged sword, because in one sense he was getting the one-on-one, which he possibly wouldn't when we returned to school. But then on the other end, he wasn't socializing because he wasn't able to be part of, he was included in the classroom Zoom sessions, but often wouldn't participate in them because of the nature of his autism. That type of forum didn't suit him. So regardless of what we were trying to offer him, it was like you won on some things and you didn't on others. And, then I can imagine for children with a whole host of other types of additional needs, there would be all sorts of issues. My son's grown up now, but I was thinking at the time, for someone like him who's hearing impaired, the issue of hearing via Zoom would have been a complication. Missing out on if people are talking over each other and there's usually that lag in Zoom, or there's too much background noise going on because people haven't turned off their mic. All sorts of little things that, most of us take for granted can cause hindrances for these types of children during the remote learning period. I can only speak from that sort of limited perspective.
Jazakallah khair.
Someone's phone is connected up. Sorry, someone's phone is connected up in the studio to the actual microphone. So
yeah, no wonder I keep getting these little message tones in my ear.
Now I've just been muted. Can you hear me still?
Yes.
I can't hear myself. Anyway, in the earphones. Okay, so we do have the lines open. That's better, thanks. We do have the lines open. The number is now legible. It is 0450 587 549. Sorry, that's the number there. I need to wear my glasses and I haven't got them on me. So that's the number there. It's on screen. We do have the lines open. So if you do have a question, if you do have a comment, do call in. Otherwise, we do sometimes tend to get the questions and comments afterwards as well. Because it's a live show, and then when people get the chance to watch it, not everyone gets the chance to watch it live. We get comments sort of flooding in. I think we have someone on the line. We'll just see if we can take someone. No, all right. Well,
no, not at the moment. Sister Sonoba, just while we're waiting to see if we can get any calls coming through, just a quick question. So we've focused a lot on children with special needs, and naturally it's an area of serious concern. We've got to look into it, got to be active in it as well. But these children eventually grow up and, get older, go into the workforce, go into other areas and all that kind of thing. Could you perhaps just talk us through sort of some of the concerns, or some of the realities rather, that could be faced with by people of special needs and varying abilities when they're in their adulthood and when they're sort of progressing beyond schooling? Because we've looked at that in a fair amount of time here, but we haven't really looked at the other end of that. So maybe you can enlighten us with a bit of that information.
I think when we work on children with special needs, our main fear is not for them to develop into dependent adults. And our focus is to make them independent as much as we can in terms of their speech, their behaviors, their managing their life, their self-care tasks, and, the last being education. And I think that's why the early intervention is very important. In terms of speech, for example, the earlier the better, because children are very, what do you call, raw human beings, where that's a good time to shape behavior, to condition their behavior. A 15-year-old would not do something for a lolly, and a 2-year-old would. And, so the earlier the better. And once the speech is there and the behaviors are targeted early on, I think we can help them develop into better independent human beings. Otherwise, of course, we know that we have special needs adults as well, and we have people in residential homes, and where when there's nobody left behind to look for them, that's where they end up at. And that's something that we would not like. I see. Any family member to happen,
And Sister Amira, forgive me if this is too personal question, but with regards to your son, you've mentioned that he's grown up now. How does life look for him with regards to his hearing impairment? Can you give us a bit of insight of how he's sort of developed and gone through? Because he's gone through schooling and so forth.
Alhamdulillah, my son, out of all my children, my kids will probably hate me saying this, but it's the truth. He was naturally the most intelligent of my children. I had an amazing memory. He actually, with no study, did quite well in his HSC, but ventured off into a...
We're not suggesting that you go to your HSC with no study, by the way.
That's not an advocation for that at all. Ended up pursuing a career in the construction field. He runs his own concreting business now. I have to say, over the last 25 years, the technology for hearing aids have just remarkably improved. He has all sorts of gadgets now that you would not, in fact, the hearing aid that he wears now, for someone who has a profound hearing loss, I can't even notice it. His speech is excellent, but I have to I put that down to the early intervention that he received from the age of 3. I remember when he was first diagnosed at 3 years of age, he had the speech of an 18-month-old baby, and by the time he was 5 years old, he was age appropriate. So the earlier and the more intensive the early intervention, the better it is for the child. And so he's had a very good life and continues to live a very good life. And still battles with little things like missing bits of information, but we've all learnt to manage that and work with him. That it's not a problem at all. I have to say too, just quickly on the issue of adults with special needs. Again, living in Australia, we are so fortunate that people have become a lot more accepting, and I often really love the fact that when I walk into places, be it Kmart or McDonald's or something, that I see, people with Down syndrome or any type of additional need that are being employed to the capability that they have. I think that's really admirable. It would be lovely to see that embraced even in the Muslim communities.
Absolutely,
we have many Muslims that run businesses, and to have those people included in some capacity within the communities that we have would be an awesome
Absolutely.
thing.
Sister, we just have our technical team sort of waving a phone furiously at us because we have our first caller. So we're just going to turn to our caller and see who's on the line with us. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam. I have a question.
Sure, please go ahead.
There's so many unidentified cases with special needs. How do you think society can work towards identifying them?
Okay, so...
we got the question right? Yep.
Sorry, just to repeat that question, there's so many kids with unidentified special needs. How can we work as a community to try and better hone in on that and try and identify that? Thank you for the question.
I think they would either be identified at school, like if you keep following up with the teacher, and if you can see any behaviors in your child, I think it's always good to ask the teacher, confirm with the doctor, and get him tested or assessed for cognitive or whatever referrals that the doctor makes. And I would actually not find it rude to say it to anyone, because I don't want to go through the pain of denial and everything that I had to go through. So I would actually identify to a parent saying that it's always good to get your child assessed.
I would definitely agree. I think that the more parents are open to listening to observations that teachers are making, and just to make inroads with a doctor. You know, the worst that can happen is it comes back, there's nothing wrong, but at least to make those investigations are worthwhile. I think what we find typically in Muslim schools is the reluctance of parents to take those concerns on board, and they just put barriers in front of it. It delays the identification, and you know, as Sister Sanova said, the longer you leave it, the harder early intervention becomes, and so we actually do our own children a disjustice.
And I guess that sort of plays into the point that you were mentioning earlier, Sister Amira, with regards to things like imams who, you know, have a big role to play in terms of just lifting that attitude in the Muslim community, raising awareness, and just letting parents, families know that, look, it's okay, don't worry about it. You got to look into these things. We have to accept the reality of it, and we have to make sure that we're accessible, we're open, we're inviting, we're, you know, over the issue, and that would go a long way. Imagine if our community had that thorough attitude to it, and, you know, a school said, look, you know, it's probably best that you have your child looked at, and then they'd say, yeah, no worries, let's go do it. You know, rather than a reluctance, hesitation, and what's wrong, and so on and so forth. You can imagine that would really, you know, assist our community in taking on this issue in a far more thorough and comprehensive manner, inshallah.
We might wrap it up there, because we don't want to exhaust our guests as well. It's been a long episode.
It has indeed.
And inshallah, I'm sure there are some other. There's been some comments on Facebook throughout the podcast. And so we'll see if our guests have some time afterwards to share any further thoughts, but we might just wrap it up there. Look, it's not like we've exhausted the topic. There's so many things that we can still talk about. There are some good organizations. I'm aware of an organization in North America by the name of Muhsin, which is specifically dedicated to catering to the needs of special needs children. And I think there's some, you know, often we look at other countries like America and Canada and so forth to try and model ourselves on existing models like that. And, you know, there's a whole conversation around that we can have. But in the interest of time and, you know, not overkilling it with our guests, so maybe, you know, we might get a chance at having them join us again in the near future, inshallah. We might just wrap it up there.
We can leave it at that. Jazakallah khair once again from us here at the Convo. Jazakallah khair, we're delighted to have you guys. It's been a wonderful conversation. I know that I've learned a lot, and I'm certain that our listeners have as well. So from the bottom of our hearts, thank you very, very much for coming on, for making the time and really talking about a critical issue.
Absolutely.
And as was mentioned earlier, perhaps, you know, this can spark some more people to have some more conversations in certain places, and that could lead to something more. And inshallah, we can just be part of that ongoing discussion.
Sister Amira and Sister Sanova, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Inshallah, we'll leave it there. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thanks for having us. Wa alaikum assalam.